27 жовтня починає роботу медіа.
The Ukrainian Media Center is beginning their work. We are beginning today's day with talking about the future of the prospects and the reform of the state environmental control amid the full-scale war. Joining us today are Olena Kramarenko, Deputy Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources. Dmitro Zaruba is the First Deputy of the State Environmental Inspectorate of Ukraine. Olena Kravchenko is the Executive Director of Environmental People Law International Charity. And Oleg Listopad, expert at the National Interest Protection Network of the Ants. Today, in the environment of the full-blown war, Ukraine is facing unorthodox challenges, including the environmental ones. Sir, may I turn to you? What the changes are needed to be introduced, including the draft law on the environmental protection, which is in the parliament for a couple of years? What is needed for it to be adopted in short notice? Thank you for inviting me for today's event. I think I should begin with a little of background. The time for the reform in the environmental protection is past due. As long as I've been dealing with the environmental protection, I remember about a constant change in the state environmental inspectorate in different images of it. This process is ongoing. In other words, it does not bring fruit. What is the ultimate result? The ultimate result is to come up with a efficient body that can and will serve the need of implementing the environmental law. Indeed, there are a lot of watchdogs that keep track of the environmental protection and bringing those who break the law to answer. But we are talking about a need to set up a single body that will take care of all the areas of implementation of the law, both by the Ukrainian nationals in terms of nature resources and the business units. This body should be having powers to prevent the breach of the law, prevention of the breaches of the law, and bring to answer those who are liable. Such a responsibility should be proportionate in a way to prevent the next possible breach of the law. In other words, people should think twice before breaking the law or to introduce a system that will serve this need. In broad strokes, that seems to be the answer. Unfortunately, during the Parliament previous sessions, as it is now, there is a great opposition to setting up a new body that would be having powers and authorization to be combined under a body that would be able to bring to answer those liable. We've been talking about that for a long time, and the draft law 3091 that you have referenced should include a point to the following effect. Who are afraid of this draft law? The businesses. These are the businesses that for a long time have been obstructing the watchdog's activities. When the state service of environmental protection visit the enterprise, and that enterprise is supposed to be showing the documents how this enterprise is living up to its environmental commitments, they wouldn't allow inspectors to check the documents, preventing the inspectorate from fulfilling their duties. The problem should have been resolved in a way that I have just described. In other words, such an obstruction of law should lead to a certain level of responsibility It's a shame that it has not been done. The first reading of the draft law, which has taken twice, when the second reading was initiated back in 2021, and we were beginning to work on the amendments according to the parliamentary procedures, it's a shame that we've experienced a full-blown invasion. And again, unfortunately, this full-scale invasion has changed the policy of inspectorate. The inspections are the main means of implementing the activities of the state service. The 3033 decree by the Cabinet of Ministers, now I believe that it was a mission creep by the government, but according to that decree, the unannounced inspections have been cancelled. For the time of war, all the inspections have been ceased, including the ecological service and the state service on consumer protection and other services that were called to keep track of the environmental status and providing the environmental safety, including sanitary measures. The list could go on. An efficient mechanism that would serve the better watchdog activities is not in place. This has become another challenge for the reform to take place. Every time I ask the question, how are we going to implement this reform? Every time this question is bound together with the question, with a retort, how can we implement this reform now amidst the war? They want us to believe that until the war is over, we will not be able to implement this reform. The answer is negative. We need the reform now. But to have that reform implemented, we have to combine our forces with the public, with the state environmental inspection, and clearly agree to the effect that we are now offering a mode operandi. This mode should be set in stone in different documents, in strategies, Cabinet of Ministers documents. This reform has to be enacted. For this law to be effective, the draft law 3091 must be passed in Parliament, and I think we will succeed. Ms. Kramarenko, the most urgent issues in the environmental protection, what is it on your take? The challenges are enormous, faced not only by the Environmental Protection Service, but by the state in general. What Oleg has just suggested is that war has posed new challenges for the state ecological control and state ecology service. We have seen the addition a number of powers that were not key activities before the war. Today, these functions are implemented by the state service of environmental protection. What we are doing now in the first place is to record the damages suffered by the state and by the Ukraine's environment ensuing the full-scale war and by the aggressor. Recording such damages and crimes is a number one priority in our activities, the state environmental protection. We are now recording the damages inflicted to the environment as the result of the full-scale war. To buttress that, I will reference a number of figures. As of today, the service includes 130 officers. Compare that with the square miles of the territory. In relative terms, every inspector has 447 of square kilometers of Ukraine's territory. Let us calculate that, including the scale of the full-scale war. It is clear that such a number of officers is not enough. That's why everyone is aware that the crimes and breaches of law are ongoing. We see that in the documents of the prosecutor's office since July to December 2022, there have been more than 6,000 investigations launched, including more than 6,532 investigations launched by the environmental prosecution, which is to say, over this time, the environmental law has been breached on an ongoing basis. Our challenge is to conduct a reform of such an ecological control. We are also seeing that it'll take 20 to 30 years' time to keep recording all the breaches. And we will be doing this and following the investigations that have been launched by the Environmental Prosecutor's Office in terms of recording the damages inflicted by the Russian Federation. We understand that this is an additional burden, an additional commitment that our inspection faces. Today we face a challenge to change the concept that was passed in 2017. It seems to be outdated today. We are also aware that changes should be introduced into the part where the powers of the inspectorate are laid down. We are working with the public sector, with the governmental bodies, with the central bodies of the executive authorities, including the state ecological authorities. These issues have to be regulated. As of today, it is an urgent issue, challenging us to combine our efforts to make sure that this body is efficient and serving the Ukrainian people, to ensure that we will leave to as our heritage a healthy environment as it is stipulated in the Ukrainian legislation. Being aware of all the challenges and aware of our responsibilities, taking into account the additional challenge by the war, we understand that it should be done now. It should not be postponed until later. Well, my take is this: unless we start working today, tomorrow will be too late. Our commitments in terms of our relations with the European countries and the assessing of the damage inflicted by the Russian Federation. Today, in the aftermath of the blast of the Kakhovska hydropower electric dam, we know these consequences. But we are now passing over to the European level of inspection. Today, the question is not to get our officers into the field. We understand that we should not be not a punitive body, but a helping body, empowering others who are challenged to live up to the environmental law. We see our role as an agent of help, both protecting physical persons and the legal persons. It should be analyzed by the united body. 6 bodies of the central authoritative bodies are duplicating the functions of the ecological inspection. We want to see this body as a united authority and to get rid of the duplication, not to have 6 different bodies at one enterprise that are serving as a watchdog for the environmental protection and living up to the ecological law. As you have heard, Mr. Zaruba, the state environmental inspection has a additional burden. From your point of view, what must be done for this work to be more efficient? Thank you for your question. Now, my first point is that I fully echo the suggestions by my colleagues in their view of how the ecological supervision should be implemented. It's not only a state control, it's also a supervision by the public. It's a whole system that consists of many elements. This should be laid down in the legislation so that the public understands who is responsible for which part of the activities. As for the State Environmental Control Service, the most serious challenge we face is to record the damages inflicted by the Russian Federation's full-scale aggression. It's a daunting challenge. Part of our employees are now serving in the Ukrainian armed forces. They are serving as soldiers in the combat areas, which could not but put a challenge to our employee structure. Together with the parliamentary committee, together with the ministry, we've been working on the methodologies to calculate and assess the damages. But to get access to the territories, even if they are liberated, demining must be done first for us to be able to assess the damages. For example, as for the Kakhovka Dam, our officers went there and they were fired upon. I'm saying that their lives are threatened. What both speakers before me have suggested is true. Unfortunately, the number of the breaches of law has not decreased. On the contrary, it seems to be on the increase because we see the lack of the inspections and different control mechanisms. Some people seem to be taking advantage of this. They understand that there will not be sanctions today. According to today's legislation, and I quote this number when I am talking to my European colleagues, you know, today you are fined 20 euros if you obstruct the access of the inspectors. That much. And people understand that it's better for them, it makes sense for them to pay 20 euro fine, and the question is resolved. There is a lot of question that we address to our judiciary system. The inspections and different law enforcement activities are launched, but they are not brought to the court cases. We should be working on the European legislation basis. Ukraine has to live up to all the commitments in terms of our accessing the European Union. There is a plethora of challenges that we are facing. This reform should not be launched after the war. It should be launched right now. Yes, we are facing the aggression, but we are also facing the issues of duplication. We are facing the issue of law breaking. And people turn to us asking that this the nearby enterprise emits so much bad pollutions and emissions, and we are not in a place to control the activities of such enterprises. Fish Patrol Service, for example, they grant the permits and they also control this process of permit granting. So there is a need for a unified body. We understand that to record all the damages, the role of inspectors is very high. It also comes down to a matter of laboratories. What are the laboratories? How many of them do we have that are recording the environmental protection breach. I think I will go beyond the issue of laboratories, and at the end of my talk, I will answer your question about laboratories. I will quote a number of data comparing prior to the war state of affairs. Before the war, we were at the place number 5 in terms of death rate. It is explained by the fact of the environmental protection of the water, pollution. As of 2022, the International Association of Women stated that in Ukraine in 2022, there were more than 2,000 women suffering the cancer-related issues. Apart from stress situation, they also quote the worsening state of the environment as the cause of such a state of affairs. What I'm saying is that the state of the health of Ukrainians is directly correlated to the environmental issues of today. How do we record this state of affairs? The State Environmental Control Service is keeping track of the state of the environment. Since our country has become independent, the reform of the State Environmental Control System has not been implemented at all. And you have heard that the parliaments in their session before as now is actively only talking about that need. This generation's commitment is to protect environment as best as we can for the upcoming generation. This is the state of affairs prior to the war. After the full-scale invasion, in terms of statistics, more than 30,000 of square kilometers are mined. What kind of soil is mined? This is a very rich soil. Ukraine is in possession of 1/4 of all the soils that are rich soils in terms of the whole planet. And this territory is mercilessly damaged. The aggressor is turning our soil into the desert, including Kherson, Lugansk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Kharkiv regions, Donetsk regions. The list could go on. More than 23 sites of environmental protection, most precious zoos, biosphere, territories, are either occupied and are being damaged, or we will not be able to inspect them even after the war, because those territories are mined and it's difficult to conduct research there. This is as far as the statistics is concerned. How do we plan to renew our territory? If you think about the volume of bricks and tubes and everything that we'll need, it pales in comparison of what we will do to renew our environment. You know, to renew the environment, as academician Didych mentioned yesterday, he said that it'll take Ukraine from 40 to 100 years. That is to say, neither we nor our children will see the steppes, the forests that we were happy to have seen in our lifespan. You see, for the sake of our grandchildren, this reform should have been implemented yesterday. It's the aggressor, the Russian Federation, is damaging our environment, but it is also due to the business activities, people who take care of their incomes rather than environmental protection. They put emphasis on making money rather than preserving the environment. Who is going to record? Who will keep such information? How such recordings should be kept? For this recordings to be verified and to be reflected in the International Register of Damages that we are putting together now, both by the Ministry of Justice and by different international bodies, including the Presidential Office, who will tell us that these data will be accessible and are corrected. If they are not due, if they are not objective, if they are not accessed or accessible, we will not be able to present our evidence either in tribunals or in different international courts. That is to say, the less verified information is, the less objective such data are, international bodies will believe that such data are prejudiced. This information must be clear and verified and substantiated. Unless this is done, unless there is a body that is keeping track of such a data, we will see the echo of the international practice where we saw the activities of international committee that has been presenting 100 cases, and international body also allow the 6% of all the cases presented in terms of the damages to the environmental situation in Kuwait. Not to repeat such a situation, we must create high-quality professional body that has and empowered by the laboratories that you have asked about. We are now testing the soils in practically all liberated territories where we are allowed to do so, to do all the tests. We provide these tests to different laboratories, and the results are very different. Modern sophisticated laboratories that we might have had, we don't have them. The specialized environmental prosecutor's office doesn't have such high quality laboratories. They are keeping record of the damage to the environment, but the data must be provided and substantiated by a new instrument that the Environmental Prosecution Office would have. That's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that we should have the authority. My colleagues have mentioned the fact that corruption has not disappeared, and the super income that some businesses are pursuing is still there. Such businesses must be stopped, must be challenged. The forests are felled. Other breaches of law is something we are seeing. So there are 2 points here. The aggressor is killing our environment. Our own unfair and poachers and other breakers of the law are also doing damage to Ukraine. It's not that we must not muzzle this issue. We must ensure that Ukrainian environment is damaged in a less possible way. The last point to make is this. Yes, the reform was due yesterday. The public sector is ready to work on this, and I am aware that in terms of procedural and regulations by the parliament, it looks as if the draft law 3091 has been worked on according to the challenge that we are facing in terms of the recordings of the damages inflicted by the Russian aggression. It seems, sir, that we will have to deal with the draft law 3091, and we are ready. But we should sit down today, we should unfreeze the reforms. We should be aware of what we are doing today. Are we working through the parliamentary regulations, or will we be following other avenues? But the situation is this. Environment is a victim. It's a patient that is attended by the doctor from the Soviet Union, a doctor who is not aware of the modern day standards, he doesn't know the procedures, he doesn't have the diagnostics equipment, and following the rhetoric of the business, such a person can be sent to some retraining courses, and perhaps something good will happen. You know, we want this patient to be treated by a modern, young, high professional doctor with a sophisticated latter-day equipment. We want to have a European, uncorrupted, efficient body of the state ecological overview that has the powers to provide the substantiation of the verified information and data for the international register, which is also at the same time is empowered to bring to justice the domestic entities that are breaking the law. And the domestic breakers of the law must understand that they have this luxury belief that they follow. They are fined in terms of a couple of hundred of euros. They should be fined by millions of euros. Sir, I will turn to you for this reform. To be efficient, what is the role of the public sector, of the non-governmental sector? A week ago, all the panelists met at a high-level conference at the international level. We saw the talk of the general prosecutor, who said that environmental crimes against Ukrainian environment has seen 236 cases breaking the rules of law, and other cases included ecocide. If you think that the General Prosecutor's Office has launched an investigation, this is not the case. In fact, all the burden of proof is assigned to our office because there are a couple of officers only, and the State Ecological Service being tasked by the General Prosecutor's Office using their own transportation, their own vehicles that have to be filled up. They have to provide the materials for their laboratories. What I'm saying is that this is an enormous burden that we are suffering from. You have heard the numbers and the statistics of the domestic violations of the law. This is an additional burden. Of course, the State Ecological Service must be empowered to live up to their commitments. I have heard voices to the effect that now is not the time. We are facing and waging the war. This is wrong. Unless we record the damage today, as the previous orator has suggested, it will be late tomorrow because we will not be able to track all the damages. The Minister of Environmental Protection has mentioned 57 billion worth of dollars of damages. I think the number is much higher, but that's not the matter of today's discussion. As for the urgency of this issue, another example is the following. Apart from the Russia-inflicted damages, we are now investigating the water damage to the rivers in Ukraine, including the Sluch River. We have finally managed to start an investigation. What is the challenge here? My colleague has mentioned that the inspector's hands are tied. He cannot enter the enterprise just because he will not be allowed to. The enterprise will pay a minuscule amount of money. The inspector, the officer, sees from the towers that exhume the tons of volumes of emissions. He can see it clearly, but he cannot get access to the documentation. Such a grant for access must be ensured. Of course, businesses are violating the law, but the cure is evident. The state environmental service must be empowered to record this on video cameras and other technologies, put that on the internet, put it on the open domain, public domain, and the documents will say that there is a list of requirements for the enterprise to work on. I think that openness will be one of the ways to work with the businesses. Businesses are afraid that they will be terrorized by the governmental body. It's true. As for the non-governmental bodies, you have mentioned an example when an agency has been rechristened again. It has to do with the Fish Patrol Service. The last time when we tried to reform the state Fish Patrol Service, I remember those struggles, the fights. It was a couple of years ago. In the previous parliamentary session, under the previous parliament, there were people that were sent by some invested interests saying that this patrol service must have their own bodies of control, meaning that they grant the permits and they also inspect the procedure of granting the permits. I looked on the internet yesterday that the former employee of the Fish Patrol Service, and he filmed the fish nets in the Kiev Sea. Nothing can be done about it. This reform is past due. As for the law, there is a question to the following effect. Will this law put an end to all the issues? Not at all. It will only cover part of the challenges. Any reform, including the reform of the environmental state. I was working in the previous parliament as a helper of the member of parliament. It's all about talking the walk and walking the walk. The law must be enacted either through the governmental decrees. It's like a pyramid in the ancient Egypt, where we try to climb stone by stone. The issue is to get to the top of that structure. Many draft laws on the environment must be changed, must be provided with new mechanisms. Of course, finding is one of the mechanisms, but in terms of the implementation of law, it all comes down to the irreversibility of liability. It's when the fines are increased unless it leads to the criminal investigation. It's all laid down in the law. But the former legislation, the reform, let us be honest with us, without judicial system reform, without the reform of the General Prosecutor's Office, these issues will not be resolved efficiently. It's a matter of 10-10-10 rule, which is to say that the court will look at 1/10 of all the cases, and out of those, 1/10 will be enacted. The legislation is too complex. It's such a Byzantine system that allows for people to evade responsibilities. The reform is needed. The law must be adopted. The panelists know very well how to do this. They know how to do it, and I support their efforts. Journalists, do we have questions from the floor? There are no more questions. We've been talking about the reform of the environmental protection law. I think they will all be enacted. Media Center of the Attack Ukraine will resume our work at 1400. We'll be talking about the suicide cases of children during the war. Stay tuned.